I wanted to talk a little bit about the LA riots and disturbances that have been going on over the past few days. I know it was covered a little bit. Well, I mean, there was a full segment dedicated to it yesterday that Carl did, but I wanted to talk more broadly about the idea of Reconquista, which seems to be driving a lot of the illegal Mexicans who are in California and broadly along the west coast of America. That seems to be a driving, motivating factor for why it is that they're behaving the way that they are. And I'd like to add a little preamble to this by saying that in my understanding of how a nation is built and who a nation belongs to, it is the people who really built it. It really annoys me that there's this idea that something that was a deserted patch of land with a few either ranches or nomadic tribes kind of just running about on top of it prior to Europeans, or in this case Americans, showing up, still belongs to those people just because they kind of rode around on horses for a little bit doing otherwise nothing with it. You could call me a bit of a Lockean in the sense that I believe that ownership of the land, first of all, is a contractual sort of thing, given that the Americans purchased California from the Mexicans in 1848. But I'd also say it also has a lot to do with the idea of if you have mixed your labor with that land, if you've actually done something with it, if you've developed it, if you've produced something productive using that land. So I use the same thing with the idea of the Indian Americans, the Native Americans, and the Europeans, mainly British, who got here. Yes, America as a landmass existed, and it had a load of tribes all murdering each other and doing scalpings and all sorts of horrible things to one another, but they weren't actually really doing all of that much other than murdering each other on the land. America as a nation, the United States of America, did not exist until the American people, that being the British who settled there, made the nation. And it's the same with California. Just because your ancestors kind of sat around on California for a little bit in the early 19th century, they didn't build California. Americans built California. So that's my little preamble establishing my standards for who owns or who the land belongs to, personally. But if you'd like more philosophical digressions that hopefully have a point, you should watch Carl's latest documentary, our first proper documentary that we've ever done, called The Death of Man, where he looks into the philosophical underpinnings of the Enlightenment and how he believes it separated us from a sort of transcendent consciousness that was more in tune with the religious nature of man before we became increasingly secularized, particularly in Europe. That is a premium video, so if you would like to watch that, please subscribe to the website. A bronze tier membership or higher will get you access to that, along with an enormous back catalogue of material, which I think you'll really, really enjoy. So, first of all, regarding all of this stuff to do with Mexico, one of the funny things that I like to look into is the New York Times are a particularly bad one for this. What is the propaganda being pushed by left-wing media, and broader media in general, to be honest, on the deportations that are going on? What's it being pushed at? What cases are being used to make sure that everybody knows that you should feel bad about it and have some tear for these poor illegal immigrants who shouldn't have been here in the first place, being sent back to the country that they came from, that they love dearly, but would never, ever, ever, ever want to live there. So this one is a Venezuelan man whose criminal past made him a target of immigration agents, as you would hope so. So I thought I'd look through a little bit of this. So this man is part of a family called the Itriago Arevalo family, who are, like many recent immigrant families, they say, extremely close with one another. A walking path of turf patches connects their two family homes. One was shared by Carlos, Emily, and their son, the other by his parents, two brothers, sister-in-law, and niece. And this article mainly looks over the subject of Carlos, who was picked up by ICE when in Florida when he went out without his phone, so they were all confused about how they managed to get hold of him. Most of them had overstayed their visas. These are always the most sympathetic cases the media will find, but they overstayed their visas, i.e. illegally in the country, and later sought protection from deportation under the Biden administration, who were more than happy to allow them to stay in the country despite not supposed to be being there. Carlos first came to the United States in 2016 when he was 25, leaving behind Emily and their son, who was barely 10 months old. Venezuela was on the brink of economic collapse, and Carlos said he needed to find work. Boo-hoo. He got a tourist visa and planned to stay for just a few months. It didn't let him work legally, that visa, but, these kinds of people, legality doesn't really matter. It doesn't come into the conversation. So he got a job at a dishwasher, and then he met some crazy people in April of 2017, i.e. fell in with criminals, and then he ended up getting arrested in Jacksonville with a group of people accused of using ATM skimming devices to collect credit and debit card numbers to make fraudulent purchases. He knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong. I was like, ay caramba, please, no me gusta, don't send me back to my country, eh? But he said he had to use some of the stolen money to send food and other items back home. He pleaded guilty to 3 felonies and was sentenced to 5 years in a Florida prison. And while he was there, he applied for asylum. Case was denied, and in December 2021, a judge ordered him removed, which he wasn't.
Of course.
Oh, of course.
Which he wasn't, which is why ICE came to pick up with. And then when they eventually pick him up, he goes like, oh, how did this happen? Why is this happening? And the New York Times looks at the case like this and goes, poor baby. Poor Carlos. He didn't know any better. He's only a poor, retarded Venezuelan. They can't follow laws and rules down there. Look at how terrible their country is. Of course they can't, which is why they need to move here, where they will improve America.
They will improve it by getting cards that can steal from you and working gangs together that they will call just friends. Yeah. And I fell into that gang, and I just didn't know what to do as I stab a knife into the back of your neck and just turn around to rob your wallet.
Expect to see articles like this talking about the people that we've seen from the photo shoots that they've been doing, frankly, at the LA riots recently, particularly that guy on the motorbike waving around his Mexican flag, because, again, he loves Mexico so much, but he would never, ever want to live there because I assume the Mexican government aren't willing to give him free money or allow him to undercut the wages of his fellow Mexicans, whereas America is more than happy to do that, particularly states like California. But there's been this push that I think Carl covered a little bit of, but I wanted to just make it go over it in a bit more detail. There's this push from people, including Comrade Cisco, who has his banner, "Be gay, do crime, free Palestine, overthrow capitalism." I'm pretty sure ICE, if you can track Comrade Cisco down, he seems like a prime suspect for deportation, if you ask me. And he says, Americans, when the former Mexican territory got Mexicans in it, seemingly forgetting that the word former has any meaning whatsoever. And then you get people like this protester, this hideous, fat, dysgenic protester, stating that this is our city and this was Mexico. Again, in a similar way that Gen Z, I discovered last week, can't understand third-person omniscient viewpoints in novels, these people can't seem to understand what present and past tense are and what the difference between them, because was does not mean is. And surely, as well, it's not an ought-is kind of comparison as well, because California shouldn't be Mexico, as far as I'm concerned. And then the president of the Mexican Senate himself came out and said that they will build a wall and pay for it, but will do it according to the 1830 map of Mexico. Note that he's having to go almost 200 years ago for this reference point. Mexicans were settled in these territories before the US. Yes, roughly in the California area, about
7,000.
About 500 ranches were here. And 500 ranches does not a civilization make. The Mexicans living there are in what has always been their homeland. And I'll correct that. And then you get idiots like Katy Perry as well, celebrities. They always love to throw this kind of ill-informed opinion out there. She was posting about a place that literally began as El Pueblo de Nuestra Senora La Reina de Los Angeles. Yeah, we got rid of all of that rubbish and just called it Los Angeles because it wasn't that anymore. That's what Americas did. Founded by Mexican settlers in 1781. No, it was the Spanish. These people, they don't know anything. It frustrates me. All it took for preparing this segment was just like 20 minutes of Googling to get most of the information that I needed for this. And these idiots, these fools with huge platforms don't even do that. They see some infographic pop up on their social media and they go, I'd be such a good person if I shared this. The people need to know. Katy Perry.
You think that accent's so good?
Katy Perry, you're what? You're on the wrong side of 40 now, I assume? You're not relevant. You're not relevant anymore.
She's trying to be relevant, isn't she? That's it.
Well,
She's trying to bring herself back in. Look at me.
But nobody cares. All you're doing is, in the most accurate way of saying this, you're spreading misinformation. But the funny thing is that all of this attitude of the like, well, this has always been our territory, we've always been here, is actually it's the promotion of this idea of Reconquista, which is quite popular in Mexico amongst Mexicans and amongst Mexicans in the Southwest territories of states of the United States, known as advocating a greater Mexico. Such opinions are often formed on the basis that those territories were part of the Spanish Empire for centuries, and that of Mexico from 1821 until they were annexed by the United States during the Texas annexation of 1845, the Mexican cession of 1848 because of the Mexican-American War. So note as well, like, this territory belonged to Mexico for 24 years and 27 years. It has been 180 years since then, and 177 years since then, and California itself has been the 31st state of America for 175 years, because it was made the 31st state in 1850. So we're talking about a long time ago. But also, the idea of this Reconquista is like, sounds heroic, right? It sounds like...
I'm seeing American movies there with guys on there.
It sounds like the warriors, the warriors coming in and taking it back by force through honourable combat, instead of...
drip-feeding people on a plane.
Yes. Sneaking in, stealing jobs by undercutting wages, and then begging for handouts is what it actually is. Yes. So, sorry, I hate to break it to you, this
not conquer anything.
Is not warrior phenotype. Not that I've seen before.
Certainly wouldn't even be in the movie Warriors.
Perhaps in Mexico, they just build them differently, you know?
The voice didn't even sound Mexican when you played it, did it?
I'll play it.
Yeah. This is our city, and this was Mexico. You can't kick us out of the land that was ours.
Donald Trump! Do you get
walls? Walls.
Let our people free! Suelta nuestra gente!
Let our people go. You've let yourself go, Lord. Jesus Christ, the delusion. The delusion of these people. But it's very strange how popular this idea is and how long it has been going on for. People for years have called people like... I don't know, Jared Taylor, horrible, awful, racist white supremacists for bringing up the fact that a majority of people of Mexican descent around the southwest coast of America are proponents of the idea of Reconquista, turning it back into a Mexican territory, of the idea that if you don't know Spanish in these states, especially amongst some parts of the cities and counties, then you're out of luck because you're going to be a minority there. But then you see that, like, again, the president of the Mexican Senate advocating for it himself. And on the page here as well, it's got some more information. Illegal immigration to the southwest is sometimes viewed as a form of reconquista in light of the fact that Texas statehood was preceded by an influx of U.S. settlers into that Mexican province until U.S. citizens outnumbered Mexicans 10-1 and took over the area's governance. The theory is that the reverse will happen when Mexicans eventually become so numerous in the region that they wield substantial influence, including political political power. Even if it's not intended, some analysts say the significant demographic shift in the Southwest may result in a de facto Reconquista. Political scientist Samuel P. Huntington, who is the author of Clash of Civilizations, very interesting book, a proponent of the widespread popularity of Reconquista, stated in 2004, demographically, socially, and culturally, the Reconquista of the Southwest United States by Mexican immigrants is well underway. However, a meaningful move to reunite those territories with Mexico seems unlikely. No other immigrant group in the U.S. history has asserted or could assert a historical claim to U.S. territory. Mexicans and Mexican Americans can and do make that claim, and they've spoken about the likelihood, if anything like that were to happen in the future, what would happen is it would become its own independent territory, probably called Northern Mexico or La Norte or something.
It sounded a little bit like the kind of Hamas and Al-Qaeda view that you just got to outbirth the Jews in Palestine, so we'll just outbirth the Americans.
Well, look,
make it North America.
Thing for me about
and we'll help that in by mass illegal immigration.
The funny thing about the historical information given here is what the Wikipedia page just gave us is an example of, I can't say the particular phrase because it'll get us flagged on YouTube, but what I'll call the big switcheroo, which supposedly isn't happening in Europe and America, and supposedly, even if it were happening, would be a good thing because the more diversity, the better. So what it sounds to me like is that initially, California and Texas, in particular in this case, experienced a wealth of diversity flooding into it that should have made the state stronger, made the territory stronger, but instead pushed the people out who were already there. And I thought this was supposed to be a good thing or something that can't happen.
Even if the natural conclusion of it is secession or its own independent. But this is the thing, isn't it? One, mass demographic change, up until very recently, was just widely recognised as a system of warfare. It's what China did to Tibet. In order to conquer it by moving millions of Han Chinese into Tibet, so that the loyalty would obviously go to China. But also as well, even if this were...
Sorry, there you go.
Even if this were... if the American government doesn't push back against this, and it is simply allowed to continue, which of course I pray it doesn't, then it means that even if there were some attempted...
Is that Connecticut?
Yeah, these are states all across the US where they're showing support. Again... We know the areas where these people are. They are showing overt and explicit loyalty to a foreign state. One foreign state, by the way. The president, what was her name? Scheinbaum. President, is that her name?
Oh, yeah,
Scheinbaum. Yes. Has made explicitly warlike statements towards the US at the threat of having taxes on remittances, of which Mexicans send a huge amount of remittances back to Mexico every single year rather than spending them in the US economy. All of these people showing loyalty to a foreign hostile state.
Yes.
So amazing. Round them up. Stephen Miller, I know you're watching this right now. I know you're a huge fan. Round all of these people up. If they love Mexico so much,
you put them back.
They can go back. Look at this. This construction site is evidently so Mexican that they can take the time off. Not that I imagine they get that much work done, and certainly none of it very good quality in the first place. Not that I imagine they get much work done, but they've taken what little time they spend doing their work off so they can fly their flag. So send a few ICE agents around so that they can get picked up, and then when you say, you're going back to Mexico, buddy, they go, ay, 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 oh, no.
Or more, just find out who is actually building the construction site in Connecticut, find out who is the person that's owns it and hiring all of these, and say, you've just done that. I'm sorry, you're fired as a company.
Yes. But to go back to your point, Harry, about the fact that it wasn't the Mexicans who cultivated California, who grew the civilization.
They didn't build California.
They didn't build California, and what you'll get, if this is allowed to continue, is they won't, a bit like, with the British in Africa, once you leave Rhodesia, once you leave South Africa, the basic infrastructure, the actual standards of civilization will decline. California and the rest is already becoming essentially closer akin to the standards of Mexico, which are not particularly high.
Well,
no, and it'll be controlled by gangsters and criminals within no time at all. And then what will happen is that those people who are living in northern Mexico will then want to move out to the areas which are nice and safe.
Oh yeah,
so,
that was to America.
Well, that was going to be my next point. Imagine if, they actually get what they want, and all of a sudden they're in charge of that territory. All of the people of European, other descent, Asians and African Americans, etc., they all move out, and they're left in charge of it for maybe the next 177 years as well. Are they all still going to want to live there afterwards, or is it going to end up just like Mexico and they end up moving into the territory that maybe was purchased during the Louisiana Purchase, for instance, in 1803? Because, that's where everybody would move back to. And that's where they'd want to go to. They would want to start moving east and east and east, going, give me your free money, give me your jobs so that I can undercut your wages, and then send it back to the people in northern
If you look at that, going back to there, they purchased Louisiana from the French.
Yeah.
Isn't that then saying and using their argument that the French now should be able to go and live in Louisiana and just take over Louisiana?
I think plenty of people of French extract do live there, but they do so legally for the most part.
And that means that we, sitting here today, we can go to like Maryland and we can go and take over there because that's ours.
About time.
It's about time we go back there. I'd love a little chunk of Martha's Vineyard for myself. And
maybe the Dutch can make it New Amsterdam again.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just go all the way back to that. And I'll find someone who's Mexican who lives in a really big house on Martha's Vineyard, and I'll say, "Oi, op it. This is mine. It's English because we were here first."
And again,
sounds reasonable to me.
If the arguments that they're making are true, the argument that's being implied by Comrade Cisco here is that Mexico sold California to Americans, and then all of the Mexicans who were already there just stayed there forever. But the fact of the matter is that if that was the case, then there weren't very many there to begin with, because in 1850 there was less than 100,000 people there, and it was upon the discovery of the California gold in the rivers that led to the California gold rush that meant that people moved there, meaning that if you look over the demographics over time, in 1850 it's 99% white, and then by the time you get to 1910 you start to see the separation out of Hispanics from the white population. So white is still 95% in 1910, hovers around 95% all the way up until 1950. Then it slowly begins to go down.
And something happened.
Until... it starts
1980.
to shift to 1980. Between 1960 and 1980, the white population goes down by 16%. The Hispanic population shoots up over 10%, and then it just keeps going and going and going until you reach 2020, and it's 41.2% with 40% Hispanics. And I think it has gotten worse since then, because if I go down here, I think the list right underneath it is non-Hispanic white. So you can see by the time you get to 2020, bloody hell, Wikipedia, what are you doing? You're killing me right now. Jesus Christ. Apologies, folks. I really didn't mean for that to happen. Here we go. We're back to it, I believe. No, this is other demographics. And it's all highlighted as well now. Thank you very much, screen, for doing this to me. Either way, the non-Hispanic white population of California has become a minority of those who are classified as white in the state, because it was about 34%, whereas now, here we go. Yes, it was... and it's even gone all the way back over to the left. Here we go. 34.7.
That was 2020 then. So
yes.
There must have been another census in the last 5 years. There's no doubt that the Mexican must have taken over the white.
Yes, they have massively overtaken. And the question is, why is that? And well, I would say, like many of the consequences of mass immigration, like much of the consequences of mass immigration into America. It can be traced mainly back to the Hart-Celler Act of 1965, which is the Immigration Act that was that changed there, where in this article is very interesting because it goes into some of the unintended consequences of the US immigration policy, explaining all of this, because it's not just the removal of quotas, it's a lot of the other factors that came into it as well, and it's got some interesting graphs that I'll look at in a moment. So they say the year 1965 is often cited as a turning point in history of US immigration, but what happened in the ensuing years is not well understood. Amendments to the Immigration and Nationality Act passed in that year repealed the national origins quotas, which had been enacted during the 1920s in a deliberate attempt to limit the entry of Southern and Eastern European immigrants, more specifically Jews from the Russian Pale of Settlement and Catholics from Poland and Italy, groups at the time deemed unassimilable. The quotas supplemented prohibitions already in place that effectively banned the entry of Asians and Africans. Now, I found another article talking about this, where it's very interesting because it actually didn't just add in those quotas, it changed the rules of how national origin was determined. So it was that you could only have 2% of whatever the total population of any national origin was in America at the time admitted into the country as set by the census of 1890. So they pushed back the census data that they're going for so that they could again restrict it more to a Northwest European thing. But they changed the rules of how the national origin was determined to increase the potential quota of British people who were admitted into the country as well. Because, of course, most Americans, especially at that time, would have been descended from the British settlers. So they said, okay, if you're descended from a British settler, we'll count you as a British American, which means that we can increase the proportion of British people that can come into the country. So not only was it an attempt to keep America Northwest European, it was actually an attempt to keep America more specifically British as well, which I found very interesting. It isn't something
interesting element on just kind of pondering those stats where you go. It shows that the percentage of Mexicans have risen in terms of the population in California, and the percentage of white Brits or white Americans has declined. It doesn't say the kind of gross numbers. Is it kind of like the gross numbers of the white British or white Americans that are in California has actually just declined slowly because of like childbirth? But the vast number of Mexicans have come in because of mass immigration.
I think there will have been some emigration outflow of the white Americans from California because California is a state that experiences a lot of interstate immigration and emigration in the first place. We saw a mass exodus after California was... everybody realised that it's a complete s-hole all at once. So a lot of white liberal Americans moved over to Texas and other red states, to the blue cities there, for instance. But there are multiple factors. But one of the interesting things that it mentions here was that the 1965 changes changed up the quotas added for the first time quotas within the Western Hemisphere. Which hadn't existed before, to 120,000 people per year, which should have actually restricted a bit more of the Latin American migration. But it grew anyway because of people bringing their family members over, which was something that was permitted by the 1986 change under Reagan, the immigration laws. And also the fact that at the same time they repealed some law that allowed Mexicans and Latin Americans to get temporary work visas to come into the country, at which point all the Mexicans all decided at once, well, screw you, we'll come into the country anyway. In that case, we'll just do it illegally. So you can see the temporary migration on this graph shoots down. It just plummets. Whereas the illegal immigrants skyrockets, while legal immigrants
just stayed the same.
Basically stays the same here. And then, of course, when you've got all the illegals coming in, 1986 comes along, Reagan gives them the
amnesty.
The amnesty. And all of a sudden, that's just an even greater encouragement. Although we don't see the figures go shoot up, we do see them go down, but only to maybe half the level they were at their peak. But even then, this is only going up to 1995. So we know that under Biden, the figures shot up.
Oh, they shot up again. I mean,
although that has been changed. And the thing is, all of these changes, the changes to the Immigration Act in 1965, were, as you would expect from a totally legitimate democratic system, completely lied about to sell to the American people and to sell to the Senate themselves. Newly elected Senator Ted Kennedy, who served as the floor leader for the bill, assured his colleagues before they passed it that our cities will not be flooded with 1 million immigrants annually, and the ethnic mix of this country will not be upset. Contrary to the charges in some quarters, the bill will not inundate America with immigrants from any one country or area, or the most populated and economically deprived nations of Africa and Asia. So that was a lie.
Well, the honest pitch was never going to fly, was it?
Yeah. So that's some of the history and context, and given what's going on in America right now in LA, I can only hope that people continue to be deported who shouldn't be in the country. And again, Stephen Miller, if you're watching this, which I know that you are, these people seem like prime candidates. They love Mexico. They won't mind. I'm sure you love Mexico so much, I'm sure you've got great construction opportunities down there.
Technology had sufficiently progressed to reveal that mankind and the Earth he inhabited was not actually the center of the universe.